Abortion. Abortion is another very complex issue. There are libertarians on both sides of this one. I would venture to say that most libertarians are pro-life. Pro-choice. Woman has a right to abort. There's a minority of libertarians who are pro-life. Woman must carry the fetus for 9 months. This is a very complex area, a very complex issue. We're now moving into advanced libertarian theory. But again, we have our litmus test, we have our axioms, we have our non-aggression, and we have our private property rights. And on the basis of that, I have come up with a third choice. You see, the way people see it, it's either pro-life or pro-choice. Not so, not so. There is a third option, and the third option is evictionism. Now, what pro-life says is that the woman must be forced to keep the fetus for 9 months. What pro-choice says is that the woman can evict the fetus at any time, whether it means killing it or not. What the moderate, they don't call me Walter Moderate Block for nothing. What the moderate Walter Block says, what the evictionist says is, you have only the right to evict, but you don't have a right to kill. Why do you have a right to evict? Because you own the property. If you're the woman, you own the uterus. Thanks. A little weak on theory here. You own the uterus. Thus, you have a right to evict, but you don't have a right to kill. I mean, if somebody walks into this hotel and, some bumbles into your living room, you don't have a right to shoot him. First you say, do you realize you're trespassing? And this guy, oh, sorry, I didn't realize, and he walks out. If you shoot him in the back, you're not compatible with libertarianism. So you have no right to kill, only to evict. Now, the problem with fetuses is that if you evict them at a certain age, they'll die. Too bad, there's no right to life. Never mentioned right to life. Only property rights and the non-aggression axiom, no right to life. Now, in the early days, 50 years ago, the only way to evict was to kill. In 500 years from now, you know that you'll be able to evict at any stage of gestation and keep a viable fetus. Right now, at around the 8th or the 9th month, a fetus can be viable. So, and as medical science progresses, the age of viability will shrink back down toward the fertilized egg stage.
Isn't it even earlier that a fetus could be viable than the 8th month? I don't know.
Well, it might be, the question is, can the fetus be viable before the 8th month? Well, every 5 years it gets viable another week or so on average. I don't know whether it's the 7th or the 8th or the 6th or the 9th, it doesn't matter. The principle is, as medical science progresses, the fetus will be viable at an earlier stage. Well, but libertarianism is not dependent upon medical science. What we say is, you can evict at any time, but you can't ever kill. 50 years ago, we libertarians, the evictionist theory was then pro-choice. 500 years from now or 100 years from now, we'll be pro-life. Right now, we're just moderates. We say, you can evict, you just can't kill. Now, there are two objections to this. One is, well, there's a implicit contract between the mother and the fetus to keep the fetus around for 9 months. Now, I'm a fan of implicit contracts. If you buy a cup of coffee and you drink it down and then they present you with a bill for $1 trillion, you don't have to pay $1 trillion. There was no meeting of the minds. There was no contract. Maybe $5, or if it's fancy latte, $10. But, and I don't know where the exact drawing point is where it's legitimate and not. Somewhere maybe $15 tops for a cup of coffee, but not $1 million. So I'm open to the idea of implicit contracts. But I insist for there to be an implicit contract, there have to be two parties. And at the point of intercourse, if we forget about the father, we're namely relating the mother and the fetus, and what rights does the fetus have vis-a-vis the mother? There's no contract to have the baby. Well, at the time of intercourse, there were no two people. Even there was no fertilized egg. Because I hate to tell you people about the birds and the bees, the way it works is that after intercourse, the sperm gets into the egg. And even then, you can't have a contract with a fertilized egg. We're getting on to kid pornography, but the youngest kid is a fertilized egg. Another objection to my very sensible theory, if I say so myself, is that if I push someone into the water and then he starts to drown, then I owe a positive obligation which otherwise I wouldn't owe a positive obligation to. So what they're trying to say is by having a child, you're putting him at risk, and therefore you owe him to keep him alive for 9 months. My claim is that by giving birth to a child, you're not harming him. You're not putting him in a worse position. You're putting him in a better position because before the sperm and the egg meet, there's no person at all. Surely it's better to be a person for a little time than not at all. So I reject the analogy that you're throwing someone in the water and therefore you have an obligation to save them. Obviously, libertarians aren't, what do you call those laws where you have to save good Samaritans? We don't believe in good Samaritan laws. You don't have an obligation to fetch drowning people out of the water, because if you don't, you haven't violated their rights, unless you put them in there. But I deny that having a child is like putting them in deep water and they can't swim.